A warm welcome to The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the hour. NATO holds simultaneous meeting as Russian and Ukrainian officials discuss peace talks in Istanbul. 8 people wounded in Colorado after a man shouting "Free Palestine" throws Molotov cocktails into a pro-Israeli gathering. Plus, the death toll rises from floods in Mokwa in Niger State. Let's begin. NATO leaders have been holding a summit today in Lithuania, just as the Russian and Ukrainian officials held peace talks in Istanbul, Turkey. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was part of that meeting. A statement signed by the presidents of Lithuania, Poland, and Romania reiterates their condemnation for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, saying, "We stand firm on Allied decision and commitments regarding Ukraine's irreversible path to full Euro-Atlantic integration, including NATO membership." Polish President Andrzej Duda says the organization faces critical threats from Russia and it must do everything it can to determine the Kremlin's neo-imperial ambitions, especially on the eastern flank of Europe. NATO today agreed that there is need for a stronger organization, stronger transatlantic connection, more defense spending, and that the production of military equipment needs to be increased. And we'll be learning about what transpired at the peace talks in Istanbul in just a minute. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he expects more prisoners of war will be freed. He adds, however, that Russian President Vladimir Putin should not be allowed to decide who can and cannot join NATO, as his appetite for war will only increase. Zelensky was speaking at a press conference after the NATO meeting. He stressed the shared goal should be to completely end Russia's hunger for aggression, and that NATO needs to send a message that Russia will not get anything from the war. He also warned that the Russian president will keep playing games if new level sanctions are not imposed on his country.
Our delegation is now in Istanbul.
Well, the Russia-Ukraine talks have ended in Istanbul, Turkey. Both sides exchanged memoranda with terms for a peace settlement. They contain steps to achieve a full ceasefire, and Ukraine is expected to study it. Russia has also suggested a ceasefire for 2 to 3 days in certain areas, but all sides in the talks have agreed on the largest prison exchange, with all wounded soldiers to be exchanged. Moscow will also hand over more than 6,000 bodies to Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Turkish President Recep Erdogan has described the peace talks as magnificent and wants to host the Russian, Ukrainian, and American presidents in his country. He says he'll also be taking steps to achieve this goal as soon as possible. And NATO members have been reviewing their defense spending budgets, and now the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, says his country will build new nuclear-powered attack submarines and get its army ready to fight a war in Europe. He was speaking to workers and journalists at a naval shipyard in Scotland, saying that Britain cannot ignore the threat posed by Russia as he pledges to undertake the most sweeping changes to Britain's defenses since the collapse of the Soviet Union more than 3 decades ago. Like other NATO members, the UK has been reassessing its defense spending since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022.
That we're going to build at least 6 new munitions factories in the United Kingdom, generating over 1,000 jobs. We will build thousands of new long-range weapons in the United Kingdom to boost European deterrence, supporting around 800 more jobs. We will defend our homeland by investing in our air and missile defence to better protect these islands. We will create a hybrid Royal Navy, blending drones with warships, submarines and aircraft to patrol the North Atlantic and beyond, supporting thousands of brilliant shipbuilding jobs, including right here in Govan, under our AUKUS alliance with the US and Australia, We will now deliver up to 12 attack submarines, protecting Britain's waters, scaling up the industrial base in Barrow and all along the supply chain to deliver a new sub every 18 months, again creating thousands of jobs. We will also invest in world-leading drone capabilities and battlefield technology, in better kit for our warriors abroad, and better housing for them and their families at home. And finally, I can confirm today that we are investing £15 billion in our sovereign warhead programme to secure our deterrent for decades to come, creating 9,000 jobs and thousands more in supply chains across the country. First, we are moving to warfighting readiness as the central purpose of our armed forces. When we are being directly threatened by states with advanced military forces, the most effective way to deter them is to be ready. And frankly, to show them that we're ready, to deliver peace through strength.
I want to bring in now geopolitical risk and defense consulting expert Onyekachi Adekoya. He joins us from Port Harcourt in Nigeria's south. Thank you for joining us on the program, Onyekachi.
Thank you for having me, and good evening to the viewers.
Do you really think that Russia and Ukraine are making measurable progress in the peace talks in Istanbul?
So as it is, they're engaging and they're having conversations. And you did report they've agreed to a 1,200 to 1,000 prisoners swap. That shows some progress. They have also agreed to an all-for-all swap for persons under the age of 25. Sick or sick there before that. So they are apparently making progress and engaging. And as you have reported, the Russian and the Turkish side have for us the same position to say that the talks are advancing perhaps in a positive direction. So they are talking, and at least they're engaged.
No. I'm just trying to hear you. The bandwidth is a bit, unclear. But you were talking about they already, at least that they're holding talks, and that's where everyone's relief comes from. The fact that they're both meeting, that they even agreed to hold talks in Istanbul, despite the Russian President Vladimir Putin pulling out at the last minute, and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky having shown good faith by showing up in Turkey the first time for those talks, and then having to turn back since his counterpart was not in Istanbul. What do you think are the measurable What do you think is the measurable progress here, especially for both sides?
I think the most important progress is the fact that this is a thing, and the Ukrainian side has proposed a direct meeting between President Zelensky and President Putin for June 20th. So the positive side is that the prisoner swap is ongoing. There's been some show of good faith, temporary ceasefire, Easter ceasefire, the selective conversations, getting both sides to the table is very critical at this juncture. They are engaged, they are talking, and hopefully with some support from all the parties, all the bolster and hot air apart, gradually conversations are going. And this is how you reach a rapprochement. You first start by showing good faith, and then the other side, the opposing sides, would work towards repairing trust and relationship and then lead to an eventual peace. So I would say that progress is being made. This is not a walk in the park. We should anticipate a long walk. I would say anywhere towards the end of the year, even into first quarter 2026, despite the fact that the American president would want a quick resolution. There would be no quick resolution to these issues from my own assessment. So they are heading in the right direction. They are being engaged. That's enough positive sign for us to take.
Yeah.
The order speak by the German Chancellor, the UK Prime Minister, even are all just conversations around negotiation. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, I wasn't interrupting you. Just agree with what you were saying. Patience is key with these talks, isn't it? But looking at the outcomes from the meeting today, there is supposed to be an expected prisoner exchange. At least the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky alluded to that, saying that he expects a prisoner exchange, and both sides have a memorandum that they both have to study. There's also supposed to be a meeting between the Russian president and between Russia and Ukraine, beg your pardon, at the end of the month. The Ukrainian president has said severally that the Russian president cannot be trusted. He even said, Russia does need new sanctions so that to help keep President Putin in check. But you will require some sort of faith or trust to be able to participate in these peace talks for both sides, even if there does seem to be some, level of withdrawal, I would think, from one side.
Yeah, so on the Russian part, the Russians are asking who do they enter into a negotiation with, given that, according to them, President Zelensky's term has lapsed by time. So who do they sign that agreement with and who would enforce it? It's a question the Russians are asking on their side. On the Russian side also, they are also asking who exactly are they negotiating with? Are they negotiating with NATO, with the US, with Italy, UK, France, and Germany? Or are they negotiating with Ukraine? So the whole conflict is clearly convoluted. What we see is a classic case of geopolitical machinations going on amongst great power. Global power has shifted from Europe to the East. Purchasing power is in the East. Everything is happening now in the East. America's pivot towards Asia is now at its most critical juncture. So if you look at the angling of the Europeans, it will appear that they have more at stake. So if you say the negotiation should be between Ukraine and Russia, the conversations may not be very direct because, as you see, Europe has a dog in the fight. And the UK Prime Minister is correct when he says that the UK must be on a war footing because as it is today, according to some assessments, the UK will not last in a 2 weeks high intensity combat with Russia. It will take the UK another 3 to 4, 5 years to get on a war footing. Russia is already on a war footing. The whole of Europe is not yet fully mobilized to begin to posture towards a war footing. So there's some danger for the Europeans, and perhaps that's why they are a bit on the edge and trying to achieve some alignment between their position and the American position. So in terms of the direct conversations, there are a lot of parties to it. China also has an interest in what happens in this conflict, as Iran does, as Western Asia does. So we just wait to see how this goes. But again, like I said, it's a complex web of geopolitical considerations. It goes beyond Russia and Ukraine, if you ask me.
I think you're right about that. I mean, before Russia did invade Ukraine, it did seem to have been preparing, for this in a long time. The Russian President Vladimir Putin did say that he had been warning the rest of Europe about Ukraine wanting to join NATO and how Russia was putting its foot down regarding this. And speaking of NATO, it's been voicing support for Ukraine today. Today, it said that it still supports Ukraine's ambitions to join NATO. We know that this is one of the reasons why the war erupted in the first place. But there's been no real commitment from NATO. I mean, 2 or 3 other countries already have been admitted into the alliance. Um, countries that submitted their appeals after, beg your pardon, Ukraine did the same. Do you think that NATO is just giving Ukraine hope as it gauges its response to Russia?
So I think that you're correct about Russia's position on this Ukraine. Again, it's been Ukraine-Georgia matter. If you cast your mind back to the 2007 Munich conference, where Russia basically removed the kid's glove and just said, here's the line in the sand, NATO will go no further. Remember also that NATO and the West did promise Gorbachev and the Russians that the alliance would not move not even 1 meter to the east. But fast forward, following the doctrine of what is called escalation dominance, when the world was in an era of a unipolar world, as it were, where escalation was really at the hands of NATO and the US, NATO did expand to Russia's border. Well, walking Putin 1999 towards 2000, the Russians at the time could not really muster any response to NATO's expansion. But that line was drawn in the sand in 2008. Russia did invade Georgia afterwards, did also take up some part of Crimea in 2014, and then, of course, this incident in 2022. Yeah, so that's the history of the role that NATO has played. So I wouldn't say that NATO is just leading Ukraine on a part. It is in NATO's greater strategic interest to control Ukraine and Odessa and to blockade the Russians in the Black Sea, because whoever controls the Blight of the Blight Sea, which is Crimea, and Odessa, basically you have Hungary, Romania, and then Ukraine on that part, and then Turkey, which are already NATO allied members. It means that any great power who wants to project force must have a naval fleet. So if Russia doesn't have freedom of navigation in the Baltics and it is holed up in the Black Sea, the case of Europe to Asia is solved with the eventual, what will happen will be the eventual collapse of Russia as a superpower. So it's all a geopolitical calculation. Even the rapprochement from the US president to Vladimir Putin, we must understand that Putin is very nuanced, and he can see that president come, president go, the US positions will always take an alignment with that of NATO. To your question, NATO is dead serious. If it can, it would have. But there's a doctrine of mutual assured destruction if an eventual high-intensity conflict do break out between NATO and Russia. So what both sides are simply doing is climbing gradually on what we call the escalation ladder, using principles of escalation management, because the world is no longer in that era where one superpower has escalation dominance. And there's a peer-to-peer capability if Russia were to confront US or the US were to confront China. And if you look at the pairing of Russia, Russia is paired up with Iran, North Korea, semi with China, on the macroeconomic side with BRICS. So it's almost like a fair match. So what both parties can do is gradually ratchet up escalation, perhaps escalate to de-escalate. So no, NATO is not just leading Ukraine towards a funny path. NATO is dead serious. If it had the means, it would have done that overnight. So they still want to achieve a strategic defeat. It's not been a successful campaign for NATO in the last 3 years because Russia has continued to advance and increase in its armament and the level of sophistication of its weapons. So we are almost at a stalemate, and we are now approaching a dangerous point where one party can out-escalate the other party, leading to a high-intensity conflict. So therein lies the danger of where we're heading to in this ratcheting up of escalation.
Pretty interesting
Amarachi, I don't know
conversation. Yeah, but I heard
yeah.
everything you said. I just wish that, that the internet connectivity was a lot better, so we could have had the full experience of the interview. Thank you so much, Onyekachi Adekoya. I appreciate your thoughts and expressions and analysis, of course, on the Russia-Ukraine situation. We'll continue monitoring this. Thank you for joining us from Port Harcourt.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
We're off on a break now on The World Today. Coming up after. Eyewitnesses recount the dramatic scenes after the incident at a pro-Israeli event that left 8 people injured. Stay with us. Welcome back. Multiple people have been injured after a man shouting "Free Palestine" tossed Molotov cocktails at a gathering in support of Israeli hostages in Colorado in the United States. Police said 8 people aged between 52 and 88 were hurt in the attack at the Pearl Street Mall, a popular outdoor space in Boulder, about 30 miles from Denver. The FBI called it a suspected terror attack and said the suspect had used a makeshift flamethrower, Molotov cocktails, and other incendiary devices. Meanwhile, witnesses have recounted the dramatic scenes at the incident in Colorado. A suspect identified by the FBI as 45-year-old Mohammed Sabri Soliman yelled "Free Palestine" during the attack on the group of demonstrators. The special agents in charge of the FBI's Denver office gave this information earlier. Soliman was arrested and taken to hospital for treatment, but authorities do not elaborate on his injuries. We're in the Middle East now, where a Palestinian doctor whose children were killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza on May 23rd has died from injuries sustained in the same attack. 40-year-old Dr. Hamdi al-Najjar had just returned from dropping his wife, Dr. Ala al-Najjar, off at Nasser Hospital, where the couple both worked when their home in Khan Yunis was struck. 9 of the children were killed, while the 10th was severely injured. Hamdi was treated in hospital for brain and internal injuries, but died on Saturday. Ala and their 11-year-old son, Adam, who remains in hospital, are the sole remaining survivors of the family. The Israeli Defense Forces said at the time that the incident was being reviewed. The couple founded a private medical compound in Khan Yunis, of which Hamdi was the head. His brother, Dr. Ali Najjar, described him as a loving father who would tend to poorer patients for free. Meanwhile, Gaza health officials say an Israeli strike on a residential building in the Gaza Strip killed 14 people earlier today, many of them women and children. The Shifa and Al-Hili hospitals confirmed the toll from the strike in the built-up Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, saying 5 women and 7 children were among those who were killed. The Israeli military did not immediately respond to a request for comment, but Israel says it only targets militants and tries to avoid harming civilians. It blames civilian deaths on Hamas because the militant group is entrenched in popular areas. The Israel-Hamas war began when Palestinian militants stormed into Israel on October 7, 2023, killing some 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and abducting 251. Hamas is still holding 58 hostages, around a third of them believed to be alive, after most of the rest were released in ceasefire agreements or other deals. Now, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the situation is intolerable in Gaza. He was making the comment during a trip to Scotland. Starmer made the comments in Glasgow, where he announced his government's defence spending plans. Health officials and witnesses say at least 31 people were killed and over 170 others wounded on Sunday as large crowds gathered on their way to receive food in the Gaza Strip. Witnesses said Israeli forces fired towards the crowds just before dawn, around a kilometer from an aid site run by an Israeli-backed foundation.
Look, the situation is intolerable in Gaza and getting worse by the day, which is why we are working with allies. To be clear, in saying it's intolerable, to be absolutely clear that there needs to be a ceasefire, to be absolutely clear that humanitarian aid needs to get in at speed and at volumes that it is not getting in at the moment. It's causing absolute devastation. And, of course, to continue our work to secure the release of hostages who've been held for a very, very long time. We're working closely with allies on that. We'll continue to do so.
UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer will return to one of our lead stories. Multiple people injured after a man shouting "Free Palestine" tossed Molotov cocktails at a gathering in support of Israeli hostages in Colorado. 8 people between the ages of 52 and 88 were hurt in the attack on Pearl Street Mall. The FBI called it a suspected terror attack and says a suspect used a makeshift flamethrower, Molotov cocktails, and other incendiary devices. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, has been monitoring the situation for us. Maria, can we confidently call this a terrorist attack?
Yes, this is definitely being called a terrorist attack. We know that the gentleman that is suspected of this attack was in the U.S. illegally. We know that he shouted during the event, "Free Palestine," before throwing those flames and causing people to actually catch on fire. When you hear some of the respects from individuals as to what they saw when these attacks occurred, it is absolutely one of the most devastating things that some people were witnessing at that time.
So help us set the scene. What exactly was going on when this incident happened? The suspect, I suspect, well, had nothing to do with the event, right?
No, he was not anything to do with the event. Obviously, he must have known that this event was occurring. As we know that you mentioned the age range of the individuals, one actually was a Holocaust survivor. And so he was clearly aware of what was happening. We know, as you just did a story on the crises that's happening in the Gaza, we know the U.S. has obviously had varied opinions, and the president, obviously, both administrations, the Biden and the Trump administration, have shown great support for Israel throughout this, but also understanding there are some humanitarian challenges in the Gaza as well as it relates to Palestinians. And so this is, I think, again, this is the second time that we are seeing in a week's time of attacks against the Jewish community, which is causing great concern to many Americans. Obviously, we're on high alert in Washington. Just the other day, there were 2 individuals killed and lost their lives. And so this is going to continue to be something that the federal government and local governments are going to be focusing on.
Maria, the community where this happened must be shaken up by now by what has happened. And this event happening just 2 weeks since 2 Israelis were shot dead in Washington, D.C. How are authorities treating this aspect of the attack, the fact that this could be a copycat event?
Well, I think that authorities are focusing on Americans being very vigilant, very mindful of where they're going, very mindful of their surroundings, reporting anything that they see that could be looked at as an anti-Semitic attack or an attack in general against any group of individuals. And so that is, I think, the most important piece that they're focusing on is different, but very similar. And so you see one that has obviously impacted 8 people. The other one was a very targeted 2 individual that lost their lives, unfortunately, which has been extremely devastating to the communities here in Washington and across the country, obviously. But this attack, people describe the horrific nature of what they witnessed.
We haven't heard lawmakers say anything about this. I just wonder, where exactly they stand, knowing that some of these attacks are happening because of America's support for Israel, which is fighting Hamas in Gaza.
Yes, you're exactly correct. Lawmakers have not necessarily yet come out. We know there have been bills and legislation being put forward as it relates to how the U.S. responds to the war. And really, a lot of it is around the support they provide. The U.S. has been very clear to provide humanitarian support for Palestinians that are in the Gaza area, shown support for the Palestinian state as a whole. They are really focusing in, again, on humanitarian efforts, but they are showing their support for the government administration in Israel. So that has been a long-standing relationship that the U.S. has continued to support. And at this time, what we're seeing is that the administration is likely going to come out with further guidance as to the next steps, but also obviously calling for ceasefire because this is now becoming a global challenge, and the U.S. understands its role that is played within this. And so it's going to definitely be incumbent upon lawmakers to work with the president and his administration to find ways to continue with our call for peace.
Maria, thanks again for bringing us the update, and do stay safe.
Yeah.
The Democratic Republic of Congo's opposition leader Martin Fayulu has warned the country faces an existential threat from advancing balkanization and territorial crisis linked to the contested legacy of the AFC M23 coalition. This was said during an address recorded in Kinshasa earlier today. Fayulu directly addressed former President Joseph Kabila, electoral chief Corneille Nangaa, and incumbent Felix Tshisekedi, accusing them of complicity in the nation's destabilization. According to him, Congolese blood can no longer flow with your complicity, urging Nangaa to stop enabling foreign-backed violence. Accusing Nangaa of complicity in the bloodshed, Fayulu said, "Stop surrendering our soil, our lives, and our resources to foreign forces. No ambition is worth the price of the suffering of an entire people." Opposition leader also told Joseph Kabila, the former president, that collaboration with those, in his words, tearing the country apart cannot just be justified, even strategically. Well, back here in Nigeria, hundreds of people are now known to have died in the floods that hit the town of Mokwa in Niger State on Thursday. The floods, said to be worst the area has seen in about 60 years, swept through the districts of Tifin-Maza and Anguwan Hausawa after torrential rains. Mokwa district head Muhammadu Alkiu says in order to prevent disease in the area, authorities will soon start digging out corpses buried underground. Some local residents say the flooding was so devastating because a nearby dam had burst. This has not yet been confirmed by authorities. Health workers are on the ground. They spoke to our correspondent about relief for the victims.
For a workshop. So, in fact, we couldn't start in time. When we came back yesterday, they informed us we should start giving treatment because most of the victims are serious injured. So, we should give them treatment. So our AGA gather drugs and give it to us that we should be here immediately so that we'll be giving to these victims that are having problems. So in fact, most of them are at home. They're not here because they asked them to come to the camp, but they stay at home. So now we are not here so that all of them will be assembled here. We give them treatment, and please, government should help us too because the drugs we are having is not much. Government should please assist us with some drugs, because most of the drugs is not available, and the small one we have, we are lacking. So government should help us with money, with drugs, with food, so that they will help these victims. They really need our help.
For those that their houses were affected.
The little I know about is the local government chairman created a temporary camp, which the victim, they feel that it's not conducive for them. So none, any of them turn up because there's no toilet, there's no source of water. The only thing I'm seeing they are bringing is bread and soft drink and tea. And it's provided from the individuals. If they will be given that privilege, at least they should go and look for a place and build houses for that, at least no matter how small it is.
That's your point.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Meanwhile, Meanwhile, Sudan is experiencing an outbreak of cholera as the dire humanitarian situation worsens amid the ongoing civil war and escalating Western sanctions. As footage captured on Saturday in Omdurman shows makeshift treatment tents occupied by children, women, and the elderly suffering from the disease. Well, one of the healthcare workers on the ground says as soon as the cholera outbreak emerged, they set up 8 isolation tents, each tent equipped with 10 to 11 beds to accommodate patients. The recovery rate in the isolation center reached 98%, while the mortality rate stood at 1.6%. The health worker confirmed the hospital teams also intensified health awareness campaigns in neighborhoods and chlorinated well water. We're off on another break on the world today. Still ahead. Vietnam's city of Da Nang celebrates 50 years since its liberation from the U.S.-backed South Vietnamese government.
There are places you would like to go. There are faces you would like to see.
My palm is bruised. It's a tiny scar, but it's very painful.
Too many exciting things happening all at once.
From time I've always loved playing the villain.
But you can't be everywhere. Guess what? Yes, we can. Your favorite lifestyle content lives here. Let us be your eyes and ears here on Entertainment News on Channels Television.
Welcome back to the world today. The Lagos State government has announced plans to commence distribution of 80 million clean cooking stoves this month. The State Commissioner for Economic Planning and Budget, Mr. Okwe George, made this announcement during a press conference in Alausa, Ikeja. He says the initiative is targeted at women to improve their health and well-being. Also speaking at the event is the State Special Advisor on Climate Change and Circular Economy, Mrs. Titilayo Oshodi, whose office is promoting clean energy access across vulnerable communities.
Environmental concerns in Lagos is
I apologize for that. Over in Malawi, the elderly are not immune from accusations of witchcraft, leaving them vulnerable and left to fend for themselves. Well, one young woman is breaking with tradition and helping put smiles on the faces of these people and food in their bellies.
In rural Malawi, a young woman is offering sanctuary to elderly people who have been ostracized and abused due to accusations of witchcraft, charges often rooted in myth, cultural misconceptions, and illiteracy. Volunteers are seen preparing and serving porridge to nearly 80 elderly residents. Some are seen sitting together and singing outside the foundation's residential compound.
I started my Mbambande Foundation in 2020.
Founder of the center, Deborah Mbali, says, I started my Mbambande Foundation in 2020 because I looked at the abuse elderly people are going through in this area and Malawi at large. She says they were neglected because of old age and accusations of witchcraft, so I thought of giving them a home. Alan Kwenda, one of the elderly residents, speaks of Mbambande's kindness, saying she's not cared what people have said about them. Reports suggest that elderly Malawians frequently face neglect and violence after being accused of witchcraft, with some being denied food by their own families or subjected to mob justice. While Malawian law criminalizes witchcraft accusations, enforcement remains rare. According to the World Bank, 74% of Malawians associate witchcraft with misfortunes such as illness, poverty, and untimely death.
Well, history was made in Ghana on Sunday as it opened its first automobile museum in the capital, Accra. The idea of this museum came from acclaimed entrepreneur Dr. Osei Kwame Despite, also known for his leadership in the Despite Group. And those present to witness the feature got a chance to view his private vintage collections. Take a look. Automobile Museum, the first even in West Africa, features an impressive private collection of vintage and classic vehicles, such as a 1936 Mercedes-Benz 500K, a 1932 Ford Deuce, a 1958 Chevrolet Biscayne, a 1986 Mercury Tiffany, and many more. They're now on display to the public for the first time. Invited guests to the event include Ghana's traditional monarch, Asantene Otumfuo Osei Tutu II, celebrities and other special guests of honor. Guests could not help taking photographs of the awe-inspiring collection.
This is one of the
Ghanaian actor and comedian Richard Kweku Asante, also known as Calibos, described the museum as one of the modern states of art, praising its unmatched status in West Africa.
This is one of the modern states of art, yes, as you can see, despite automobile museum. So far in West Africa, I can tell you for a fact that you can't find this anywhere else. My general impression is just wonderful. I mean, coming in here, seeing cars that you can only see on televisions, on movies, yeah? In movies and all that. You are seeing it here, you can touch them and feel it. It's something you should watch out for, yeah.
Other respondents noted the careful attention to detail and its potential as a major tourist draw, and another said they had not seen anything like it before.
This place is one of one. I don't think there's anything like this here in Ghana or the whole continent of Africa. The cars are very beautiful, and you can tell that attention to detail has been put into place when making this museum. Everything looks amazing, and I'm sure many people would want to come and see this place and even ride in the cars. So I can say that they've done a very good job putting this place together.
We haven't seen anything like this before in Africa. I stand to be corrected. But this is massive, and I'm so proud of Dr. Osei Kwame Despite for making this huge for us, because this is a museum, auto museum in Ghana. So I'm urging each and every one, wherever you are, come to Ghana, come and experience this, because this is magnificent.
The opening of the Despite Automobile Museum is expected to boost Ghana's cultural and tourism profile, while offering valuable educational opportunities for car enthusiasts, students, and historians. Dr. Osei Kwame Despite, whose inspiring journey from cassette seller to business mogul is widely celebrated. He also leads the Despite Group, which encompasses Peace FM, UTV, Neat Foods, and Best Point Savings and Loans.
Không cần xả đâu. Dạ? Không cần xả sụp đâu.
We're looking at the fireworks that mark the commemoration of 50 years since the Vietnam central city of Da Nang was liberated from the US-backed South Vietnamese government. This is the launch of the 2025 Da Nang International Fireworks Festival. Looking at this spectacular pyrotechnic display, spectators who were there and visited the event for the first time were excited at the dazzling light show, immersed themselves in the lively onstage music performance. So many echoed admiration for the festival's impact, expressing hopes that similar events would continue to promote local culture and attract travelers from around the world. This year's Da Nang Dif, also known as the New Era, not only celebrates the historic 1975 milestone, but also aims to attract more international visitors to the vibrant coastal city.
Team Da Nang Vietnam was the first team to represent Vietnam at DIFF.
And that's the world we live in today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.